There was some negotiation for security on this agreement.
Indeed. In fact, there was a special agreement drafted for security, wasn't there? Your lawyer, Mr. Phillips, drafted an agreement for security. Don't you remember that?
Yes, I do.
Yes. And this thing went on, since you're having trouble remembering how long, it went on from May 20, 1993, when Mr. Stilson sent his first draft to your lawyers, until Jerry died on August 9, 1995. Isn't that true?
I object to the form of the question. First, it's compound. Secondly, it's Mr. Camara purporting to testify. And third, it's argumentative.
I sustain.
Well, this attempt to reach an agreement was going on when Jerry died. Isn't that true?
It may have been. I'm not sure. I wasn't paying as much attention to it at that point.
You weren't.
In a sense, perhaps the most facile argument that the estate has is the one that we just heard being suggested, and that is that this was an ongoing, living, breathing document that was growing, as opposed to all this stuff about fraud and chicanery and him being high, that in fact they just hadn't really finished.
Yes, and because it's so brief and leaves out so many points, they have an argument in that area. However, since it was drafted by lay people, we have to see what kind of influence the other attorney had in drafting it.
You said earlier when we started talking about the agreement that an agreement is a meeting of the minds between two people. And in a sense, an agreement written on a piece of toilet paper between two adults, if they're non-lawyers, is as valid as a 40-page document if it really reflects what they think.
Correct.
And so the question of the length of the document isn't the critical criteria, though it may be important if it turns out that a lot of things that ought to have been considered weren't.
And also what happened after the document was signed. Did the parties perform? And I guess the argument that's going to be made by Carolyn Garcia is that she performed her part by giving him a divorce, and he performed his part by paying her the amount of money each month that she was entitled to.
Let me interrupt you. Helen Lucatus, who's standing by in California, has Paul Camara, the lawyer representing the estate, with her. Helen?
Hi, yes, I do have Paul Camara. He's actually arguing on behalf of the beneficiaries of the estate and the widow. He's arguing that there was not a real contract here, and I know today you argued in a motion for judgment. You asked the judge to rule as a matter of law that there was no evidence of a contract. What's the basis for your argument?
Well, our basis for the argument was that the 13-page paragraph, I should say a 13-line paragraph, that they're claiming was a contract did not have enough to it to amount to a contract. And that the fact that the lawyers continued to negotiate for 2 years after this 13-line paragraph was signed indicates that they knew they didn't have a contract, but they were trying to get one. And before they did, Jerry died.
Well, now, we've seen the document. Jerry Garcia signed it. His ex-wife signed it. It looks as though on its face that it's something that they agreed to.
Well, sure, they both signed it, but it says that she's going to get $5 million. It doesn't say what Jerry's going to get. It says that the agreements they've made before are superseded. Now, one of the agreements they made before was that he was going to pay her $24,000 a month. Now, after they signed the document,
there's some written agreement. Isn't that correct?
Object to the form of the question. That's an argumentative question also, Your Honor.
Well, no, I'll rule that. Do you understand that question?
No, only that he's asking...
Well, do you know what went on for the next 2 years? I mean, he assumes in that question that you knew what went on between the lawyers.
Yes, I knew.
Yeah, you were getting copies of these letters just like we got copies of letters saying we weren't giving you or Stilson wasn't giving documents, right?
Yes, but...
And you were also getting copies of documents saying, we want to make a settlement on these terms, and so on.
The whole proceedings of the estate down, we feel there's more important issues than this. This was an easily fixed deal.
Now, Deborah Coon's attorney, who we just spoke to, is alleging that maybe this was an unfair thing, that maybe your mother with her attorney got in cahoots and got Jerry Garcia to sign this.
I don't think that's true. I think he's reaching for a truth that just isn't there. And I think that that what Jerry was getting with that document was basically the freedom to pursue his career without my mom having a claim on his future earnings, and she was willing to take this settlement and be gone, you know, and he'd still have, you know, see us kids anytime, and he would have the rest of his business. At the time that was signed, he is pulling in really a large amount of money.
And you were with your father. In your opinion, did he want your mom to have this money?
Absolutely, yeah. He would never have dealt with her like this in the first place if he didn't want her to finalize the divorce and have enough money to keep her taken care of for the rest of her life.
Now, Deborah Coon's attorney, who we just spoke with, Paul Camara, is technically representing you and all your other sisters who are beneficiaries of this will. Is that difficult for you to sit and to watch him?
It is very difficult. They didn't speak to us about it at all, so he is representing the estate, but more on behalf of Deborah than on behalf of any of the other beneficiaries.
Now, you're siding with your mother, but you stand to lose some money since you're one of the beneficiaries of the will.
It's just not that large amount of sum. We feel that with the estate, once it's finally finished and out of probate, there'll be a large amount of money for everyone to split, and it's really not that large of a sum when you look at the larger picture.
Maybe you can answer a question that we have. That is, what is Jerry Garcia's estate worth?
Well, that's a question we would like to know the answer of very much as well. We really can't say. It could be anywhere from $0 to $100 million. We've heard that it's insolvent and completely broke when he died, but we've also heard now that it's completely full of money. So nobody really knows and nobody's talking.
Now, your mother is just one claimant.
Right.
Tell me about the others.
We have I don't know the exact numbers, but over $10 million claims. One from Miss Nora Sage, who runs the ties, artwork, and lithographs, and then one from Vince DiBiase, who also did artwork and was one of my dad's managers at one time.
Now, I've heard there's an acupuncturist who is making a claim.
There's an acupuncturist, there's a physical therapist, there's a BMW company, there's a couple of banks, there's another lady, the mother of our other half-sister Keelan, who's 9, and it just, the list kind of extends. It's from physical therapists all the way up to ex-wives.
What would your father say about all this?
That it was just a real good joke. A real good joke.
You think he's laughing about this?
I think he regrets it. You know, I would hope that he was. I have a few choice words when I see him next time. That's like, couldn't you have tied it up a little better before you left? But I think that he would be amused and very grumpy. You know, well, maybe not grumpy, but amused, but not wanting to be here for any of it.
All right.
Definitely a joke, though.
Well, you've been here, and your sisters have been here, and I know it's getting started again, so we'll let you go inside. Okay. But thank you very much for talking with us today.
You bet. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much. Well, I'm going to head back inside in just a few minutes, but that was Annabelle Garcia, Jerry Garcia's.
Late Grateful Dead legend Jerry Garcia continue their $5 million battle in court. Plus, at the Simpson civil trial, the defense continues their relentless attack on the LAPD, suggesting sloppy evidence collection and contamination. Also, attorney Robert Baker's star has risen since becoming Simpson's point man in the civil trial. We'll profile Baker tonight.
Trial story. Cases too important to miss. From start to finish, the critical moments from the most vital trials. Stories you won't forget. Trial Story. Tonight at 9.
Hello, I'm Chris Gordon in the Court TV News Center with our afternoon update on the O.J. Simpson civil trial. Simpson is fighting legal battles on two fronts. The family court case could be decided any day now by a judge who will determine whether Simpson regains custody of his two youngest children, Justin and Sydney. Simpson attended closing arguments in that trial yesterday, and now that it's over, he can concentrate on the wrongful death action against him in Santa Monica. O.J. Simpson came to court for his civil trial today while waiting word on his custody case down in Orange County. The defense is presenting witnesses to show that crucial blood evidence may have been contaminated by shoddy police collection techniques. For example, in Simpson's Bronco, police recovered blood which DNA analysis indicates came from Ron Goldman, Nicole, and O.J. Simpson. At the criminal trial, scientist John Gerdes cast doubt on the results.
Based on just the integrity, the sample handling of the Bronco, do you have any confidence in the results of those, from a scientific point of view, the results of those tests?
No, you can...
No foundation. Beyond the witness's expertise.
You can no longer have any scientific confidence in that.
But Gerdes today was not allowed to express his opinion that the LA police lab is a cesspool of contamination, as he had done during the criminal trial. Today, in his civil suit, he did testify, "I believe there is an unacceptable risk or chance in the way these samples were handled of there being cross-contamination." Another witness for the defense, LA Police Detective Kelly Muldorfer, was asked about her inspection of Simpson's Bronco. She was investigating the theft of some receipts from the Bronco after it was impounded and couldn't say if it had any blood in it at that time. Here's what she told us after testifying today.
I didn't recall whether I saw blood or not. It really had nothing to do with my investigation. It's not something that I would normally have taken any notice of. He wasn't happy with that answer, but that was the truth of the matter, so I stuck with what I remembered.
The defense also called Lieutenant Frank Spangler, who was asked whether former Detective Mark Furman removed his jacket while investigating the double murder. The suggestion here is that Furman may have taken a glove from the crime scene, hiding it under his coat, and dropped it at Simpson's house, where he then pretended to find it. Joining us now live from the courthouse with the very latest is Court TV's Mary Jane Stevenson. Let's start with Mark Furman, who is playing a part in this trial, although not in person. What is the defense trying to do?
Well, Chris, you sometimes got to wonder whether this is the trial of O.J. Simpson or the trial of Mark Furman. His name comes up almost every day, time and time and time again, especially now during the defense case. And so this morning with Detective Spangler on the witness stand, they brought out that Spangler had seen Mark Furman wearing a coat at some point during the day, and then later that morning he wasn't wearing the coat. And really what the defense is doing here is just throwing out questions so that the jury has these questions in their mind about what could have happened. For instance, what happened to the jacket that Mark Furman was wearing earlier? Of course, Detective Spangler didn't know the answer. He simply had to say, I don't know the answer. But this just leaves the jury with questions so that the defense wants the jury to speculate about the possibility of Mark Furman having the opportunity to have planted that glove. And that is what the defense is working on very, very hard, is showing that Mark Furman had the opportunity to plant a glove and that all the other police at the scene, he could have done it without all the other police at the scene having seen him.
Of course, at the criminal trial, didn't the defense try to suggest that he hid it in a sock, the glove?
That was one of the suggestions.
All right, so same conclusion, a little different strategy by the defense. Let's turn to Kelly Muldorfer, who said she didn't recall when she examined the Bronco looking for receipts whether or not there was blood. And she said in the interview after testifying today, he wasn't happy with that answer. Who's she referring to?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question.
She was asked about not being able to say whether there was blood in the Bronco, and she says, I'm sorry if they weren't happy with that answer. Who wouldn't be happy?
I don't know exactly, Chris, who she was referring to, but you can presume she was referring to the plaintiffs simply because she doesn't remember seeing any blood, and that was in July, and some of the blood that was collected from the Bronco wasn't collected until August, and that is the blood that the plaintiffs say was planted in the, or I'm sorry, the defense says was planted in the Bronco. So I don't know for sure who she was talking about in that interview, but you can presume that the plaintiffs weren't particularly happy with her answer.
Okay, let's turn to John Gerdes. Where is he now in his testimony?
Well, under cross-examination, I should say a very effective cross-examination by plaintiff's attorney Tom Lambert, he got John Gerdes to admit that although he says that he doesn't have any faith in all these DNA results, if all of these blood samples had been contaminated, Gerdes admitted, it would have had to have happened like this. First of all the blood samples had to have been completely degraded. Then they all would have had to have been uniformly contaminated with the same DNA. And then the substrate controls, which are the controls that they take from near the blood drop, where they pick up the blood drop, they take another swatch around the area. That's called a control swatch. all of those had to test negative for DNA, and those did not test for DNA. And so Gertie's finally admitted on the witness stand that it seems as if there was not contamination on some of those samples because of those substrate controls. All of the substrate controls that the LAPD did in this case came back negative for DNA, and that is very strong evidence for the plaintiffs. So although Gertie's testimony seemed extremely damaging to the plaintiffs this morning, as they came back on cross-examination, it was very effective, and now it seems as if Gertie's testimony has almost been wiped out.
Okay, finally, let me ask you what, if anything, we know about the trial just concluded in Orange County, the custody case.
We do know that there is no result yet, and O.J. Simpson is in the courtroom right now. As you said earlier, he is awaiting this. This is a very important ruling for him. Most people think that he will get his children back. The attorney representing the children recommended to the judge that O.J. Simpson get his children back, and generally that basically seals the fate for the children. So O.J. Simpson waiting on that. We still don't have any result in that case. Chris, we do have somebody in Orange County waiting for that, and as soon as it happens, we'll bring it to you.
Mary Jane Stevenson reporting live from Santa Monica, California. Our thanks. Court TV's next update on developments in the Simpson civil suit will be tonight on Primetime Justice. That's at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 5 o'clock on the West Coast. And join me here in another hour for the latest legal news from the courts across the country, including the trial of an American soldier accused of spying for China and the legal fight following the crash of the plane piloted by that little 7-year-old girl trying to set a record as the youngest pilot ever to fly cross-country. I'm Chris Gordon. See you then.
We're about to rejoin live a proceeding we've been following for 2 days at Court TV. It involves the estate of the late singer Jerry Garcia of the Grateful Dead. His second wife, Callan Adams Garcia, has an agreement to be paid $5 million over several years, executed in 1993. However, his third wife, the one who was married to him at the time of his death, now contests that agreement, and we're watching a hearing in which David Hellman, a lawyer who was present at the time of the signing of the agreement, is being cross-examined by the lawyer representing the third wife in the estate. Let's join this testimony in progress. Actually, it's direct examination, but he requested it be adverse.
If at some point...
I don't know if there was ever, I don't know that there was ever formal litigation between them.
Well, wasn't there a claim that this Rackow fellow embezzled $200,000 from Jerry?
There was a dispute between Rackow and the Grateful Dead at one point about that type of an issue.
That Rackow had embezzled a couple $100,000, right?
Objection, Your Honor. It's without any relevance.
Oh, it's getting there, Your Honor.
Irrelevant.
Mr. Rackow, I'm hearing, is involved in this settlement that has to do with the non-marital cohabitation case between the parties.
I don't see any relevance at this time. I'm sustaining the objection. If you can establish some relevance later, let me know, and I'll let you revisit this.
Now, since becoming a CPA in 1972, has your accounting practice been separate from or incident to your law practice?
I have not had an accounting practice.
Well, have you done tax returns for your law clients?
Yes.
And that includes Jerry Garcia?
Yes.
And you did Jerry Garcia's tax returns from 1974 until 1993?
I don't believe I did all of them for those early years. I reviewed some of them, but I didn't prepare all of them.
Well, you reviewed them in 72 and 73, but you began doing them in 74 and all the way through for 19 years, didn't you?
Objection, Your Honor. These are the leading questions that are not proper. He is not a 776 witness.
He's forgetting, and I'm entitled to refresh your recollection.
Well, Mr. Camara, you ask him his questions, maybe not quite as hostilely as you're doing it, and we might get there faster. He obviously, there's a whole series of tax returns that he may not remember each and every year.
From the mid-70s to the mid-90s, fair enough?
Yes.
Okay. Now, presently, you are a certified tax specialist, are you not?
Yes.
And your law office in Marin County was, from the time you came back here in 1979 until 1995 at 5234?
Yes.
And now you're at the Cal-Land building?
Yes.
Now, do you remember the first legal, incidentally, did you ever have a social relationship with Jerry Garcia?
You mean, did we ever go out together or do any activities?
Whatever you would consider social.
Well, no.
Okay. Did you, wasn't it a delinquency with taxes that Jerry found himself involved with that you first represented him?
Yes.
That was sometime in 74 approximately?
Yes.
And in the years following, you did some estate planning for Jerry?
Yes.
You did a will for him in 1981?
Yes.
And did you do a will for him in 1985?
Yes.
And you did his last will in 1994, the one that's being probated, right?
Yes.
And am I correct that you also did tax projections and cash flow planning for him?
Sometimes. Yes.
And you did financial statements for him?
Only for bank loan applications.
But financial statements were prepared by an outside service under your direction. Isn't that correct?
Yes.
Jane Marion? Is that the right name?
Yes, part of the time.
I'm sorry.
Part of the time.
And what kinds of real estate transactions did you handle for Jerry over these years that you were doing these other services as well?
He bought and sold some homes.
Did you arrange loans for him?
Yes.
On how many occasions?
Maybe 4, 5, 6.
Did you rent some of his properties?
I didn't act as a rental agent.
I didn't mean that, but did you supervise the management and rental of some of his properties?
To some degree, yes.
And did you arrange for the improvement of some of his properties?
Yes.
Now, in terms of entertainment law, what did you do for Jerry?
There were some record contracts that I was involved with, I believe in the 70s, early 80s. There were some...
Pardon me, 70s and...
And early 80s, I believe. There were some copyright issues that came up various times. There was some contracts that came up with agency relationship with William Morris.
With what?
William Morris Agency.
Who was that?
It's an entertainment agency in Los Angeles and has worldwide offices that represented Jerry for about the last year of his life.
Now, could you try and give us an idea of how continuous this was or how sporadic? And over what period of time?
What is representation of Jerry in the
in entertainment area, Your Honor, yes.
I would classify it as probably sporadic, and things would come up occasionally.
Over what period of time were you sporadically representing him in the entertainment area?
Well, the entire 22 years that I represented him.
Did you do any licensing? Did you work on any licensing arrangements for him?
Yes.
What about art? Did you do anything, have anything to do with the merchandising of his art?
Yes.
When did that start?
The early 1990s.
For how long? Till he died?
Yes.
And this includes the tie business?
Well, that was a sub-license that I was not directly involved with, but the licensing I was.
And you incorporated Consensus Reality?
Yes.
Now, am I correct that Hal Kant represented the Grateful Dead? You did not represent the Grateful Dead, did you?
I did a few things for them at one time in the past, but he regularly represented them.
And what about Ice Nine?
Yes, he also represented Ice Nine.
Did you represent Jerry in negotiating a movie with Arista? A-R-I-S-T-A?
No.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to take a break. We'll be right back.
Now, when Jerry had any difficulty with...
If you're a fan of Jerry Garcia or the Grateful Dead, you might be saddened to know that his estate is subject to some serious dispute. Carolyn Adams Garcia, his second wife, known also as Mountain Girl, who was with him for many years, had an agreement with him framed in May of 1993, pursuant to which she was received $5 million over time. On his death, however, in 1995, the estate, pretty much guided by his third wife, Deborah Coons Garcia, challenged that amount and that agreement. And right now we're watching a hearing. On the witness stand is the one other person besides Carolyn and Jerry who might have some inkling about that agreement because he was at least physically present when it was drafted. He's on the stand. He's called by the estate. The estate wants to make him a hostile witness. The judge said no. But you can sense the contention in the questioning as Paul Camara, representing the estate, directly examines David Hellman, the lawyer for Jerry Garcia.
Right.
Well, he was arrested a couple of times, and Mr. Andrian handled those situations.
Okay. And Mr. Hal Kent, what did he do for him?
He mainly did the entertainment law issues and was the initial one that started the licensing with Nora Sage. Yes.
And finally, Bruce Stilson.
He handled some family law issues for him. He handled the dissolution with Carolyn. He handled some other business matters for him.
Now, other than that, were you his lawyer and everything else that involved legal attention?
Objection to the extent it calls for speculation.
So far as you know?
Yes, unless there were others that I just don't remember.
Mm-hmm. Now, would it be fair to say that you were Jerry's, between 1975 and 1994, that you were basically his general counsel, advising him in all of his matters?
Well, I wouldn't say all of his matters. I've advised him in many different areas, and we discussed many areas.
I'm sorry. Substantially all of his matters.
To the extent that you would consider the other's representation not substantial, but yes, I talked to him about many issues.
Now, you asked his general accountant, I believe you said.
I said general counsel, Your Honor. I'm sorry, I may not have spoken clearly.
All right.
Did you
General
understand my
counsel.
question clearly, Mr.
Yes.
Hellman? Thank you.
Yes.
Could I have what the question was, Your Honor?
What he asked him was between 73 or 74 and 1994, did you act as his general counsel?
That's right. I didn't catch
That's right.
Right.
Give me the powers of attorney. Now, in addition, is it correct that sometime in 1992, you obtained Jerry's general power of attorney?
Yes.
Is it?
They really happen as exhibits.
Pardon me?
They already happen as exhibits. It's 89, 90, and 91.
What are the numbers?
Your Honor, it's H9. It's H90.
H90?
H90.
90 and 91.
H90, Your Honor. I'm sorry, I'm awash in documents here, and
While they're tending to administrative tasks, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. This is the hearing involving Jerry Garcia's second wife, Carolyn Adams Garcia. She has an agreement to be paid $5 million. That would include money out of his estate after his death in 1995. But his third wife said no, and they're in court right now. Carolyn Adams Garcia has already testified. Now on the stand testifying is a man named David Hellman, a lawyer who was around when the agreement entitling Carolyn Adams Garcia to $5 million was signed. He's being examined on direct by the lawyer for the estate. If you detect some hostility, it's real. The lawyer has asked that he be treated as a hostile witness or an adverse witness. The court said no, renew your application later. Let's watch this direct examination.
Now, at the time you submitted this power of attorney to him, did you hold the power of attorney, the general power of attorney of any other client of yours?
Yes.
How many?
Objection, Your Honor. Relevance was...
Well, I can find out how many. All right, overruled.
2 or 3, probably. I don't remember specifically.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. 2 or 3?
I said I don't remember specifically.
Yes, and did they leave these power of attorneys in force indefinitely, or did they generally revoke them at some point?
Objection, Your Honor, without relevance. What these other clients did
That really
with
is
Mr. Hellman in his practice.
I mean, certainly can go into whether he had held other people's powers of attorney, but then that's just not relevant.
Okay. Was this the first power of attorney you ever obtained from Jerry Garcia?
I don't recall.
And what was the occasion for him giving you this general power of attorney on February 28, 1992?
I know it was used shortly after it was signed for the acquisition of Heather Katz's house. That was Jerry's daughter. Jerry was out of town, and I needed to sign documents related to purchase of the house, loan documents, etc. There may have been other uses for it prior to that. I don't recall.
Well, if you were going to be authorized by Jerry to act for him in connection with the purchase or a real estate transaction for Heather Katz, could that not have been done with a special power of attorney?
It could have been.
Now, in this particular case, if you look at the second page of the general power, the first paragraph indicates warning. Have you located that?
Yes.
Quote, unless you limit the power in this document gives your agent the power to act for you in any way you could act for yourself. And then it enumerates the ways this can be done. And toward the last third of the document on that page says, it may be in your best interest to consult with a California lawyer because the powers granted by this document are broad and sweeping. Now, so far as you know, did Jerry consult with a lawyer before he signed this general power of attorney for you?
Only with me, that I'm aware of.
Now, you understood, didn't you, that if he's giving you the general power of attorney, this warning is that he talked with a third person rather than the lawyer to whom he's giving it. You understood that, didn't you?
Yes, he had that opportunity.
Did you advise him of that?
I went through this with him.
And it says next that the powers granted by this document will exist for an indefinite period of time unless you limit their duration in this document. You see that?
Yes.
Now, did Jerry limit the duration of this document?
Objection, Your Honor, to the relevance of these questions. The time that is being spent on this document signed in no relationship to 1993 is, there's simply no relevance. It's among other things, an Evidence Code 352 objection. It is just a consumption of time.
Your Honor,
what's the relevance?
When I made my opening statement, I told you this would happen. I said.
And I said in response, what do you want me to do, suspend the evidence?
And I said, no, I don't.
Right.
I said, all I want you to do.
You said that Mr. Phillips would make objections, and that's one of his roles. He made an objection on relevance, and now I'm simply asking you what's the relevance.
Well, now we come back to where I've indicated to you what the point was, why I said that in the first place. I do not have Jerry Garcia here. I have Mr. Hellman here. What I'm trying to develop, and the court may feel I'm not doing it quickly enough or effectively enough, but what I'm trying to do is develop the relationship between him, Jerry Garcia, and Mr. Hellman. Now on May 13, May 11, 1993, they're going to be in a room together with his wife, Carolyn Garcia, and something is going to get signed. Now I suggest that I have to develop the relationship between Jerry Garcia and David Hellman, as well as the relationship between David Hellman and Carolyn Garcia, for me to come down to May 11, 1993 to make my case.
Well, and you're certainly entitled to do that, and I haven't heard any objections as you go through that until you then start dissecting this document. I mean, I assume there's no objection if you want to introduce into evidence all three powers of attorneys.
No objection, Your Honor.
And the terms are the terms. And if they're of unlimited duration, they're of unlimited duration. You're certainly entitled to develop the relationship. Nobody's trying to preclude you from that, but in the interest of time, let's just focus on the relationship and then not analyze each document in detail, for example.
Well, is it fair to say, Mr. Hellman, that this power of attorney gave you the maximum amount of power that you could possibly have over another individual's affairs?
Objection to the
Well, that's fair enough. He's an attorney. That's fair enough. Can you answer that?
Yes, over his personal and business affairs, not health. It doesn't cover health care.
No, it doesn't cover health care. And let me just ask you, this power was so broad that theoretically, do you remember the thing that was signed on May 11, 1993?
Yes.
This is it. It's Exhibit W7. With this power of attorney, theoretically...
W7.
Thanks, Sean. What did I say?
I think you said 77. Anyway, W7.
Well, I just want to be sure I don't say it again. W7. With this power of attorney, theoretically, you could have signed this document for Jerry and bound him with it. Isn't that correct?
Yes.
Okay, I'd like to put them in evidence, Your Honor. I'd like to put 89, 90, and 91.
No objection?
No objection.
All right, all three will be admitted.
Now, Mr. Hellman, Exhibit 89 was replaced by Exhibit 90. Do you have those in place?
Yes.
Because the state changed the form, right?
Yes.
Otherwise, it was the same document with the same maximum power.
Yes.
The same unlimited period.
Yes.
And this Exhibit 90 was signed by Jerry
March 30, 1992, and you recognize his signature.
Yes.
And Exhibit 91 was a durable power of attorney for health care. And apparently, this was signed by Jerry. If you'll look at page 6.
I don't have a copy in front of me.
Oh, I'm sorry. Here, let me give you that. Page 91. Apparently that was signed by Jerry on April 30, 1993. Do I read that right?
Yes.
And you recognize the signature?
Yes.
Now, just while we're on that date, April 30, 1993, that was, when he signed this, wasn't he in the office with Deborah Coons, later Deborah Coons Garcia?
I don't recall Deborah being there.
You don't. Now, this was April 30, 1993, which was 3 days before you and Carolyn and Jerry met in your office to talk about a resolution of the divorce. Is that right?
Well, I wasn't a party to the discussions. My office was made available to them, and I had told them both that I couldn't represent either of them. They had counsel, and they were presumably in contact with their counsel about what was going on, but that I had done tax work for them and other things and couldn't represent either of them in discussing those issues.
Now, in this Exhibit 91, we're going to come back to that, but in Exhibit 91, you prepared the document, right?
I did, or somebody in my office did.
Under your direction?
Yes.
You have indicated Deborah Coons to be the conservator of the person in the event Jerry needed a conservator of this person, right?
Yes.
And you were already appointed conservator of his estate, weren't you?
That nomination was in the
prior document.
Prior, in number 89.
Yes. Did you know on April 30, 1993 that Jerry and Deborah wanted to be married to each other?
I don't recall if Jerry had told me that at that point in time. I don't believe he had.
Well, did you and he discuss who Deborah Coons, the nominee conservator of his person, was?
Indicated a friend, girlfriend.
Nothing more than that.
That's all I remember.
Mm-hmm. Now, this Exhibit 90, which is the more recent general power of attorney, that remained in effect from 1992, February or March 1992, until sometime in 1995. Do you recall?
Yes, I believe so.
And what happened in 1995 with respect to that general power of attorney?
Jerry sent me a letter asking that I not use it anymore.
Okay, and was this the time when he had engaged a Southern California accounting firm to take over his affairs from you?
Objection, Your Honor. These are, again, leading questions that are as if it were 776. You can ask him what happened. You don't have to testify for him.
Well, I'll allow the question, but I don't know why we're pursuing it. I mean, if they terminated the accounting relationship, fine, establish that. Then is that what you're trying to do?
They not only terminated the accounting relationship, they hired a lawyer named Robert Kligman at the same time, right? Approximately?
Your Honor, to relevance. What is the relevance in 1995? What was happening?
The relevance was in 1995, they hired a family law attorney to look into taking some action with respect to Exhibit W7. Am I calling it the right thing?
Right.
That's the relevance.
All right, that's certainly relevant, and if he has any knowledge on that subject, you can examine him on it.
Am I right that in 1995 they hired Robert Kligman, Esquire? When I say they, I mean Jerry and Deborah.
Well, his services were engaged. I'm not sure. He did not have any official capacity in any of the cases at that point in time, but was merely consulting to see what potential things might be done.
That's right. And what potential things was he looking into that might be done, if you know?
In relation to which?
In relation to the W7.
We held a meeting with Jerry. There was Kligman and Steve Cantrock from the accounting firm, Gelfand accounting firm, and myself and Jerry. And we discussed whether Jerry wanted to try to have it found to be null and void, or whether he wanted to continue with the payments that were under it, or whether he wanted to use that as a negotiating issue, because security for payment was the primary issue that was going on there. Carolyn was concerned about security if something happened to Jerry or if his income dropped, and that was the issue that had not been able to be resolved. So there were discussions about whether or not negotiating, leaving that in place, but maybe lowering the amount or some other alternative might be appropriate.
But one of the alternatives that was discussed was taking some action to nullify W7. Isn't that correct?
It was considered, yes.
And it was just the time when your power of attorney was terminated?
Well, Jerry asked me not to use it. We then had a subsequent discussion about who was going to take over and deal with it, because Jerry was on the road a lot and not available to sign documents. And I posed the question to Mr. Cantrock if he was willing to undertake it, and he was not. So the conclusion, Jerry said, just leave it in place, and then we'll discuss it if you need to use it.
Now, when you first began representing Jerry in the early 70s, where was he living?
I don't recall.
How about Stinson Beach? Does that refresh your recollection?
Probably.
And with whom was he living?
I don't think he was living with Carolyn.
Mm-hmm. And did you know that they had also Sunshine Kesey living with them? Did you know that? When you first learned that they were living together?
I don't have a present recollection of knowing that at the time.
Did you know in 1974 that Jerry had children?
Yes.
You knew that from doing his tax returns, didn't you?
Reviewing them, yes.
Mm-hmm. Now, did you start representing Jerry before he began this living arrangement with Carolyn at Stinson, or afterwards? If you know.
I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Now, at some point in their relationship, Jerry wanted to end their relationship. Isn't that right?
Yes.
And did he consult you about that?
Which relationship? There's no time frame at all on this.
Which relationship in the time?
I'm sorry, if I missed the time, I meant in 1975, his relationship with Carolyn Garcia.
I object to the relevance of it, Your Honor. I think the court has ruled on the issue of the marriage, and I don't see what relevance this is.
Background, who ruled that?
I don't recall having a direct discussion with Jerry. Ron Rackow was the one that asked me to prepare the document. That was what I did.
Mm-hmm. Did you know that, well, let me ask you, did you have, incidentally, you say Ron Rackow asked you to prepare a document. What kind of document did he ask you to prepare?
A release for Carolyn to sign, and then the grant deed where Jerry basically deeded the Stinson Beach house over to Carolyn.
Now, do you recall having Jerry's financial statement in your file in 1975 showing you just what exactly he had at that time?
Yes.
That was with Z in our deposition. Why did you have his financial statement in your file?
I would receive them as a matter of course regularly to see what was going on.
But this particular financial statement was in the file that you had on the 1975 settlement between Jerry and Carolyn. Isn't that true?
Objection, Your Honor. It's the 776 objection. No basis for this.
Well, I'll overrule that objection. Try not to ask leading questions, but I guess this is a quicker way to get through this, but go ahead.
Thank you.
I recall it was in there.
Yes, and don't you generally keep a financial statement file for Jerry?
Yes.
This particular financial statement of March 31, 1975, which I'm going to show you, this one, which was Z of your deposition, was in your 1975 settlement file, though, with the...
Now, what's the exhibit number of that?
H78.
H78?
H78. All right, would you... Oh, did you have any contact with Carolyn Garcia in connection with this transaction by which a release was signed by Jerry and his house turned over to her?
No.
You're sure of that?
Yes.
Since we're talking about it, what number?
One.
Huh?
One.
Number one. Okay, we're starting with number one. It's called full release and satisfaction of claims. Yes, Your Honor, this is full release and satisfaction of claims, and attached to it is a grant deed.
H1.
Pardon me, Your Honor?
H1.
H1.
Right.
Is it a group? I gather it's a group exhibit H1 consisting of a full release and satisfaction of claims consisting of 2 pages, attached to which is a grant deed.
Correct.
Now, Mr. Hillman, did you prepare the full release and satisfaction of claims?
Yes.
And did you prepare the grant deed which is attached? Or
Yes.
was it prepared under your direction?
Well, they were prepared under my direction.
All right. Now, I'm sorry, did I give you a copy of the financial statement of March 31, 1975?
Yes, you did.
Oh, good. And what number did we find out that was, Your Honor?
878.
878, thank you. Now, if you'll just look at, incidentally, according to this agreement or this release, looking at the first paragraph, am I correct that Jerry is, as part of this settlement, conveying to Carolyn his house in Stinson Beach and all of its contents?
Yes.
And what is he getting in return?
Release from any further claims.
A release from any other further claims. Let's see here.
It's the last sentence of that paragraph. Related claim out of alimony or community property.
Does hereby release, forever discharge Jerome Garcia from any and all claims and demands of any and every kind, name, nature, or description, and from any and all damages, actions, or causes of action, either at law or in equity, that the undersigned, and that's Carolyn Walker, has or in the future may have against him by reason of or arising out of any claim to alimony or community property resulting from their holding themselves to be husband and wife, although not legally married, from approximately January 1967 to 1975. So that's what Jerry got.
Yes.
A release from alimony or community property, etc., right? Right?
Yes, what it says.
That's what it says. Now, did you consult with Jerry before you prepared this document by which he divested himself of his home?
Objection, Your Honor. It's argumentative. It's irrelevant.
Well, I think it goes into the relationship. I'll overrule that. Go ahead. Can you answer that?
No, I did not directly talk to Jerry about this.
You didn't. Did you make any investigation of any of the facts before you prepared this document by which Jerry divested himself of his home?
Well, check the argumentative form of the question.
All right, sustained.
Did you make any investigation of the facts before you drafted this agreement?
Mr. Rackow gave me the facts, and I took those facts and put them into the document.
Mr. Rackow gave you the facts?
Yes.
Was that the extent of your investigation?
Objection, Your Honor. Argumentative.
Sustained.
Did you investigate any further than rely on what Mr. Rackow told you?
Same objection. Argumentative.
Sustained.
What other investigation did you make?
Concerning this document?
Concerning the facts that led you to believe that Carolyn Adams Walker had any kind of claim for alimony or community property against Jerry Garcia.
I relied on the information that Mr. Rackow had provided me, and I looked at the financial statement, which you've given me as a document, and indicated what assets were there. They did not include any goodwill value for the various other investments. I could see that related to the Grateful Dead or Ice 9 and the record companies.
Well, did you know that Carolyn Adams Walker had a husband while she was married to while she was living with Jerry Garcia?
Objection. Objection, Your Honor, to leading question number 1 and number 2. It's irrelevant.
What's the relevance again?
Your Honor, I'm trying to show that Mr. Hellman gave Carolyn Garcia Jerry Garcia's house with no legal basis for it whatsoever. There was no legal basis for it whatsoever. The law did not...
To that?
Pardon me?
And what's the relevance of that?
Because he's going to do things like that again and again. And then they're going to meet on May 11, 1993, and they're going to sign exhibit whatever it is. That's the relevance, Your Honor. That's what I've been trying to show. And since Jerry's not here, I got to do it the hard way.
We've heard that. I'll overrule the objection.
Thank you, Your Honor. Please, I'm very sorry if I appear to be pressing. I don't mean to be rude.
You don't have to apologize. You're doing your job. He's doing his job, and I'm doing my job. Let's get on with this.
Now, somewhere in this melee, I lost my question. Could I have it read back, if you bear with me? I know that's a trouble, too.
All right.
I do.
This goes back before I changed the papers.
It would be just that, today.
He was financially generous to his extended family of ex-wives, companions, children, and colleagues. However, when Jerry Garcia died in 1995, that all stopped. Now his family is fighting over the spoils in a California courtroom. This is Garcia's second wife, Carolyn Adams Garcia, known as Mountain Girl to many. She says Jerry Garcia's estate owes her $5 million under a 1993 divorce settlement.
Those payments were made from January of 1994 until Jerry Garcia's death on August 9th of 1995, and they ceased, and no payments have been made since then. And that's the object of this proceeding.
But the estate's lawyer, Paul Camara, says Jerry Garcia's fortune shouldn't be paid to Adams for a whole host of reasons.
The marriage was a sham. The marriage was not based on affection. The marriage was instigated by Carolyn Garcia.
Camara says Jerry Garcia wanted to divorce Carolyn Adams all along so he could marry Deborah Coons. That's why he signed the agreement. And, according to Camara, Jerry Garcia's judgment was impaired.
Poor Jerry Garcia was a drug addict that he was a drug addict to such an extent that it did affect his judgment.
Carolyn Adams says that just isn't true.
There is no evidence of any kind that any drug-related use in any way influenced what he did.
And what about the marriage?
Marriage was in all respects in accordance with California law, and in all respects a valid marriage.
The main beneficiary of Garcia's estate is Deborah Coons Garcia, his third wife and widow. According to his will, she is to receive 1/3 of his estate. Annabelle Walker Garcia is the daughter of Carolyn Adams and Jerry Garcia. She estimates his estate to be worth between $10 and $100 million.
There's so much money to be coming into the estate from our dad's artwork and ties and clothes and everything that he was doing, the Jerry Garcia Band, the Grateful Dead. There's hundreds of millions of dollars.
But her interest in this matter is more than merely financial.
We're supporting our mom. She raised us as a single mom. She pretty much gave her life over to raising us kids and giving us a stable home life, despite the rock and roll world that we were born into.
Well, that this all ends up in court is a sad story. This case, it begins a long time ago in San Francisco in 1966 when Jerome John Garcia, a musician in a local band, fell in love with a young woman named Carolyn Adams. The two moved in together. Jerry became famous as the Grateful Dead won a huge following, and the couple had 2 daughters. on the witness stand in this trial as part of her effort to show how much she and Jerry had been through together, and thus how natural it would have been for him to enter into this generous agreement. Carolyn Adams remembered the early days.
In Stinson Beach, while you were living there, were there any problems with respect to the celebrity of Jerry Garcia?
Well, the first few years were relatively benign, but as the band toured more, there began to be people appearing in the yard that were strangers. It seemed like every time the band went out on tour, some not very well-centered people would follow them back and eventually find their way to our house and show up in our yard. And we had a lot of different incidents. I did have to call the police once for a guy who was setting a fire in front of our front door in the middle of the night and had threatened to come into the house and cut all our throats. And I felt increasingly insecure in Stinson Beach.
Well, of course, it wasn't a complete drag being with Jerry Garcia and the Grateful Dead. Mountain Girl, as Carolyn Adams was and is known to many Deadheads, told the court of a legendary tour she made with the band, the time they went to Egypt and played Under the Moon in the arms of the Sphinx.
Jerry was going on tours and recording, and then we went on the now famous tour to Egypt for 3 weeks.
And that was, the famous tour to Egypt consisted of what?
Well, it was the Grateful Dead played at the Great Pyramids for 3 nights in September of 1978. And everybody went. It was an enormous mass exodus to Egypt, and there was well over 100 people on that tour. And we took a 2-week vacation after the concerts up the Nile in a boat.
Cool. Helen Lukatis is our reporter on this trial, and she joins us from San Rafael, California. Helen, first, there was an issue brought up today and resolved today. One of the claims of wife number 3, the widow, is that wife number 2 was never a wife at all, that there was no marriage between Jerry Garcia and Carolyn Adams, Mountain Girl. What happened?
Well, early today, the judge ruled that as a matter of law, that issue's already been decided. Back in 93, there was actually a dissolution order granted by a judge concerning the marriage, the divorce of Jerry Garcia and wife number 2. And the judge today said that's proof enough that a valid marriage did exist. He disposed of the issue, and they moved on. But up until then, the attorney representing Carolyn Adams said if the judge hadn't ruled that way, he eventually could have asked for a jury trial on that issue.
It's poetic justice. They had a hell of a deal, but they wanted to sweeten it. And poor Jerry couldn't keep going on tour. He couldn't keep paying, and his heart gave out.
Now, that was the attorney for Deborah Coons trying to argue that the contract, the $5 million contract, was patently unfair, and that wife number 2 knew what she was doing, and she was trying to take advantage of Jerry Garcia. But it wasn't long before Carolyn Adams' own attorney went on the counterattack, and here's what he had to say.
And those last comments are so outrageous that I couldn't comment on his motion without at least mentioning those. The suggestion that Jerry Garcia passed away because of this matter is absolutely without a shred of evidence. There will be no such evidence. There are grist for tabloids, but there's certainly not a matter that's proper for an officer of this court to be saying here. It is outrageous, and I ask that he be censured for that.
Now, if in fact Jerry Garcia wanted to end his marriage amicably with his wife and wanted to avoid ending up in court, this is certainly something that he never expected and never would have wanted. Terry?
All right. Helen, this was an issue that must have really come as kind of a surprise in the courtroom there. The lawyer for the estate saying essentially that Carolyn Adams, Mountain Girl, drove Jerry Garcia to his death with this agreement. Any reaction?
There was, in fact, it was the first time that there was vocal reaction in the gallery. The children of Jerry Garcia and Carolyn Adams and another child have been sitting in the courtroom each day, and they all kind of gasped. I talked to them afterward, and I talked to Carolyn Adams Garcia afterward, and they were really surprised that the attorney, they felt, went over the line and made this very unfair statement, unkind statement.
All right, now this is a contract case, but that's not why we're covering it. That's probably not why you're watching it. Jerry Garcia, that's why we're interested in what's happening in that courtroom, and there's an obvious irony in all of this. Paying lawyers in suits to argue before a judge in a robe in a fight over money was the last thing Jerry was about, as his daughter Annabelle Walker Garcia told Helen today.
What would your father say about all this?
That it was just a real good joke. A real good joke.
You think he's laughing about this?
I think he regrets it. You know, I would hope that he was. I have a few choice words when I see him next time. That's like, couldn't you have tied it up a little better before you left? But I think that he would be amused and very grumpy. You know, well, maybe not grumpy, but amused, but not wanting to be here for any of it.
All right.
Definitely a joke, though.
Well, let's get a deeper sense of what was going on in the complicated life of the leader of the Grateful Dead. Joining us on the phone from his home in Carmel, California, is Robert Greenfield, the author of Dark Star, an oral biography of Jerry Garcia. Mr. Greenfield, welcome.
How are you, sir? Call me Bob.
Bob, okay. Yep. Bob, let me ask you actually a question that has just occurred to us here as we've taken a look at this case. Why is she called Mountain Girl?
Well, that was her prankster name, and, you know, you said they met in San Francisco. She actually was one of the original merry pranksters. She was Ken Kesey's companion during that period in her life, and she comes from upstate New York, and I guess it was just her personality. She's very, as you've seen, pretty out front, pretty straightforward, pretty sincere.
Now, this is, as I say, a contract dispute, but is it also a personal dispute between wife number 2 and wife number 3? Do you get a sense that there's animosity here?
Well, I think if you read the book that I put together after Jerry's death, unfortunate death, the name of the book's Dark Star, there is, in that book, there is a sense that there's been personal antipathy between these two people, I guess, for almost 25 years. They go back to the early 70s when Jerry and Mountain Girl were living together in Stinson Beach, and I believe Deborah was living nearby, and there was no love lost between these two women back at that period.
And as I recall, in one of the passages in your book, you talk about the what happened with the remains of Jerry Garcia.
Well, you know, to jump forward 25 years, which I guess indicates that things don't really change that much, and Jerry would have said this, they just get more serious and more bizarre, is that after Jerry died, the ashes were meant to be scattered beneath the Golden Gate Bridge in the San Francisco Bay. And Carolyn and her daughters discovered, I guess by reading the newspaper, that Deborah Coons Garcia and Bob Weir of the Grateful Dead and a documentary film crew had taken some portion of Jerry's ashes to India, where they were scattered in the Ganges. And the comment, which was widely reported, was on the front page of the San Francisco Chronicle out here. I believe it was Mountain Girl who said Jerry had never been to India in his life, and the Ganges was the most polluted river on the face of the earth. So even when it came to what was left of the guy, there's no agreement on where he wanted to be.
And that is sad. Stand by for a second. Let me bring in our guest here in New York. Jackie Barnett joins us once again tonight, a regular, both a deadhead, I think, and a matrimonial lawyer.
I'm grateful not to be dead, though.
Yeah, okay. Let me ask you about why this is in court. This is really why people hate lawyers, in a way. Here's a piece of paper. It's pretty clear. Jerry will pay Mountain Girl $5 million over 20 years. And here they are in court, the last place that the hippie ethos ought to be. Was there no other way, do you think?
Well, in fact, instead of hating lawyers, had they both used lawyers when they drafted the agreement, we probably would not be in this spot. So one could argue that had they done it in the proper fashion in terms of formalities, they would have avoided this kind of protracted battle. So you could have said lawyers could have been their guardian angels in a way.
Well, let me ask Bob Greenfield about that. There's some sense in this case that the reason this was signed without lawyers is because Jerry Garcia and Carolyn Adams Garcia just decided, you know what, rather than go through the typical divorce with all the lawyers in a big case like this, let's just do it ourselves.
Well, I would feel that that's a lot closer. And again, I'm not able to watch this trial on courtroom TV, sorry. And the accounts that I've read about it state that there was a lawyer accountant present, either who drew up the agreement or supervised it, who's also involved in the estate. One thing I'd like to say regarding that comment which was made about the fact that poor Jerry worked himself to death trying to pay off this agreement, that really is an egregious comment. Jerry worked because he loved to play. Jerry worked because the Grateful Dead needed him to play. And every time they would sit around and have another band meeting and they would tell Jerry that they were going back out on the road again to work some large stadium where the DEA would be busting kids, and Jerry knew he wasn't going to like it, he would look at them and say, "More money, man? More money?" So it's not as though he was working to make the payments to Carolyn Adams.
Right. Okay, we're going to talk about money right after this break, and we're also going to see the lawyer who was in the room with Jerry and Carolyn Adams Garcia to work out the agreement at the center of this dispute. He comes to court and faces some hostile questions. And still ahead, one of the first courts-martial surrounding the so-called Army sex scandal ended today before it ever really began. We'll have that story and other legal news later on Primetime Justice.
See what's on Intro Thursdays. It's the History Channel and Court TV. At 6, discover the History Channel, the new cable network created by A&E. The History Channel is thought-provoking television that brings the past to life. At 9, spend 3 hours with Court TV. Only Court TV explores the justice system, documenting the drama of real-life courtroom situations. The History Channel and Court TV. Intro Thursdays. See what's on.
Special secret smiles in the corners of your mouth, sweet for touch, a kiss an exciting and a tender way, your incredible eyes that dance and twinkle and flash and flirt and laugh and stun and also warm and soothe, spark of deepest love.
Jerry Garcia was in love with Carolyn Adams, as the sweet love letters he wrote her, which she entered into evidence, show. But that was a long time ago. By May of 1993, when the piece of paper at the heart of this trial was signed, the two old hippies had loved and lost, raised 2 daughters, and endured a lot together. Is that piece of paper, in which Jerry promises to pay Carolyn Adams $5 million over 20 years, a valid contract? Jerry's widow doesn't think so. Deborah Coons Garcia claims Jerry was too deep in the clutches of drug abuse to know what he was doing. There was only one other person present when that paper was signed, David Hellman, Jerry's longtime legal advisor. He was asked point blank if Jerry Garcia was too stoned to know what he signed that day.
Before Jerry signed this document, did you give him an opportunity to read it?
Yes.
And did he read it?
Yes, he read through it.
You remember him reading through it?
When I gave him documents to sign, he'd always at least go through them, ask questions. I'd explain the answers to him.
He always did that?
Yes.
Even in his bad drug days?
Well, he never came in my office in a condition that I felt he was high or on drugs. He always was lucid and intelligent.
Isn't it true that he would generally sign anything that you would put in front of him?
Argumentative.
All right, sustained.
For the widow to win, for Deborah Coons Garcia to prevent Carolyn Adams from getting her $5 million, David Hellman must be destroyed on the witness stand. So Paul Camara, representing the estate, grilled Hellman on just how much he really knew about the situation before him.
Did you make any investigation of the facts before you drafted this agreement?
Mr. Rackow gave me the facts, and I took those facts and put them into the document.
Mr. Rackow gave you the facts?
Yes.
Was that the extent of your investigation?
Objection, Your Honor. Argumentative.
Sustained.
Did you investigate any further than rely on what Mr. Rackow told you?
Same objection. Argumentative.
Sustained.
Well, Did you know that Carolyn Adams Walker had a husband while she was married to while she was living with Jerry Garcia?
Well, that's the way it went for David Hellman in this case. Let me first ask Jackie Barnett, our guest commentator, what the lawyer for the estate is trying to do here with David Hellman. He's the lawyer. These two people signed the paper, $5 million from Jerry to Mountain Girl. What's going on in court?
Well, he's trying to make him into some sort of co-conspirator. And the fact that he had served as Jerry Garcia's attorney in the past, one would think that if anything, he would have had his allegiance to Mr. Garcia and to the future work that he would have had by working for him. No one would have anticipated him dying so early, obviously. So it's a very heavy burden to try to show that this man conspired with Carolyn, the ex-wife, against his long-term client. But that's what he's trying to do.
Okay, let's go to Bob Greenfield in Carmel, California by phone. And Bob, what do you make of, there's a couple issues here. First, the drug abuse issue. Let me ask you that. He, of course, really struggled, Jerry Garcia did, with drug abuse, especially in his last years. And the claim here is that he was in some kind of haze throughout the last months and years of his life, rendering him incompetent. What's your read on that?
Well, let me ask what may be an insipid question. Did he not sign the papers which established this estate or this trust after he signed this paper with Carolyn Adams?
He did indeed, and as Jackie Barnett, our guest here, pointed out last night, he married Deborah Coons shortly.
Several months after this, so you can't selectively say on Tuesday, drug stupor, Thursday, I was fine, and if his deepest drug days were the last few years of his life, that was the time that he was involved in his third marriage. So I would think those are the acts that I would be more concerned about having invalidated.
Well, I can't argue with that, and I would also tell you that there are 65 people who speak in Dark Star, and many of them characterize Jerry's last days, as we're referring to them, and obviously he was in bad shape sometime. But no one ever disagrees with the statement that I heard made earlier by Hellman, I guess. He was lucid, he was competent, he was producing artwork, he was going from city to city and performing with the Grateful Dead. Granted, he was debilitated and was not playing the way he had, but this was not someone who was unable to understand as simple an agreement as this seems to be.
And that doesn't have to deal with competency, your ability to perform in a musical fashion. Also, it makes sense that one would provide a substantial amount to the mother of two of his children, because that's a way of also providing additionally for the two children that he did have with her.
Well, here's what's great about the two of us speaking, which is, she's speaking from the legal viewpoint, and I am always looking for character. And what I can tell you is that it was an integral part of Jerry's character to take care of every woman that he ever had a relationship with. He was unable to stay with them. He was unable to be faithful and remain in a relationship. But when he left, he gave them a house, he gave them money. He was attempting to make up with the material possessions for what he could not do with his own personality.
He was a gentleman.
It's a form of estate planning as well as a very protective way of saying, I'm going to make sure that the mother of my children, who will undoubtedly leave that money and take care of those two girls, the $5 million. It made a lot of sense.
Okay, let me quickly and finally ask Bob Greenfield, how much money are we talking about here? Any idea?
Well, you're asking the $64,000 billion question. I mean, no one seems to know how much money is in this estate. No one seems willing to reveal how much money is in this estate. The only thing I can tell you that everybody knows for a fact is, in their last years on the road, the Grateful Dead as a touring band were grossing $50 million a year, and that's road receipts, and their merchandising was probably bringing another $30 million a year.
And the estate isn't over, because there's still going to be merchandising in the future. And when you see some of these celebrity auctions, you know that there's a lot of value that could come in the future.
Absolutely. Very interesting case, and these twin perspectives were great. Jackie Barnett here.
Pleasure.
And Bob Greenfield in Carmel. Thank you. I'm sure we'll see you both on this case as it continues. Right now, we'll take a break. Up next, the mother and the stepmother of the little girl who was killed several years ago attempting to pilot a plane across the United States face off in court over the father's life insurance money. And still ahead on Primetime Justice, O.J. Simpson is back today at the civil trial, where his attorneys may have been thwarted in their attempt to paint the LAPD laboratory as a cesspool of contamination.